So, uh,
Go ahead.
well, I had a recording thing pop up here.
Yeah, it's okay.
All right. So anyway, I had a few years back when I was writing my first book, 19th Century Baseball in Chicago. I happened to get the Henry Chadwick, uh, scrapbook on film. So I spent a lot of time at the local library, and this is before the joys of Google and online research. And so what I did was, as I was going through the microfiche and the microfilm and all that stuff, I would print out pages of Chadwick's scrapbook for kind of my own personal research. My original research was very Chicago based. I was being kind of tutored by John Hussman and Frederick Ivor Campbell back then, and I'd ask questions that they couldn't answer. So as I was going through stuff, I'd be able to find who's the first team in Chicago was my ultimate goal. So while I was doing a lot of that research, I'd come across various things about the Knickerbockers and town ball and various things like that. So what this presentation is today is basically I try to pick out some of the cooler items that I printed out and saved. I've had all my uh, physical research, digitized a couple years ago, so I was able to pull them up on PDFs. And a lot. I have to apologize because a lot of the microfiche, copies are kind of tough. There's kind of mismarks and the thing about Chadwick's scrapbook, um, to a detriment almost, is it's a mishmash on every page. So you can have something about 1857 New York, Knickerbockers or the Gothams or something on the same page as something from 1906. So unless the date is marked on the page or circled, there was a footnote. It's really hard to tell what year some of these things come from. So and this is a good example of that. We end up finding I end up running across this about the old Virginia ball game. And so when I found this, maybe, God, 20 years ago, I sent it off to Larry McCray, who run the protoball.org. And God rest his soul, he passed away a couple of months ago. Um, but we couldn't document it. We didn't know what paper it was from. We didn't know what year it was. And then I lost track of it. I had it physically, and I put it in the wrong file. I put it in a Massachusetts file I had on a Massachusetts game. So recently I've been kind of going through a lot of my research and stuff like that and discovered it again. So, and thank God it was right before Larry McCray passed away, because it's taken me about 12 years to find it. But this is a good example. So, this is a game called Round Town. And it's the only example of the game anyone's found so far. And I won't take time and go through and read the whole thing, but this here, you could read it later yourself, or you could be reading it now for all that matter. But basically talks about the game itself. It's a combination of rounders and town ball, and that's the thing about early ball games is you'll see as I go through. Let me go to the next page. Uh, Honey, hold on a second. I'm having technical difficulty. How do I, where do I hit to go to the next page? Enter. Okay. As another example, so the Round Town turned out to be from 1866. So, and they had said they'd been playing that for 100 years. So Here's another example of here's one from Continental Baseball, 1875. Talks about how their boys indulged in a friendly game of baseball the day before the Battle of Bunker Hill, I believe, um, and goes on to describe the game. It's almost like, early games of like, this game, the kind of mental baseball game and games like, town ball and stuff like that. There's a lot of people that play on that. And, what I like to do is kind of take a look at like old style games and what would they look like today. And that's why there's not a lot of early baseball research out there because any kind of baseball game, is basically it's almost like having your family picnic and then having a pickup softball game. That's not going to make the newspapers, and you're going to have 20 people on a side, so everyone gets to play. Those were a lot of the early ball games. When you see town ball and things like that, they're usually, much like today when we play vintage baseball, the center of some festival, be it Arbor Day or, a Sunday gathering picnic, that type of stuff. So that's where a lot of those games, kind of, spread the game of baseball. And, not to go off on a tangent, but, I hope all of you gentlemen know at this point, Doubleday did not invent baseball. You know, just like Henry Chadwick said, baseball wasn't invented, it just growed.
Mhm.
So this, and I wish I would have had, this is an article that I found and I ended up transcribing it. So this talks about the old Cherokee bat and ball game that's been going on for 300 years. So this was written, I think, in the 1880s. So so basically, Cherokee tribes would have a bat and ball game in the fall, and the winner would get hunting rights. So this is kind of a synopsis of it. It was basically a 10-page article, so I tried to condense as much as possible, but in great detail, it talks about the guys would kind of festoon their body with cuts. So the guy with the with more cuts on his arm uh, has been doing it a lot longer than a guy with two or three cuts on his arm. So the old warriors were all caught up basically because of this bat and ball game. And not to digress, there was and I was trying to find it and I couldn't. Um, I had seen a thing that I'm sorry, when the Quakers saved the Acacians out of Canada and brought them down to Louisiana. So the Acacians are Cajuns as we know them today. So they're escaping religious prosecution in Quebec, I believe. And so the Quakers helped them get to New Orleans. And there was a passage that I'd seen or a quote that said that as the boat approached New Orleans, Choctaw Indians were engaged in a bat and ball game described, pretty much as the same game as the Cherokees. So, that's another, question of, history and research. That's kind of more of my area expertise is like, pre-National Association, pre-1870. And some of the things I look at and I've been involved at with like protoball and stuff like that is, trying to figure out who brought baseball to America. And what's interesting is with these Indian games, and the fact too that when, if you look at proto ball, when Columbus discovered Hispaniola, that the natives there were playing a bat and ball game with rubber gum balls. And that, as we know, it is, Dominican Republic and Haiti. And as we know today, that some of the best baseball players in the world come from the Dominican Republic. So I think some of those things kind of go hand in hand. So could they have been playing ball games in America before Columbus got here? Yeah, there's a good chance there was. So or did the Pilgrims bring the English rules with them? Was it the Quakers? Was it the Dutch? Was it? the Puritans, whoever it may be. But that's kind of, what I'm, researching all the time, looking for stuff like that. So, um, and if you guys, want to shout out questions or whatever, I'm happy to answer them as we go. Um, and then here's another example is, as you can see, kind of, mid frame there, two young lads were taken before the police of Glasgow about the 1st of May for breaking a pane in a shopkeeper's window and playing trap ball. So, first of all, Glasgow, we don't know if that's Scotland or we don't know where it is in the United States. Above that, they're talking about Indiana and Illinois, but not 100% sure what this is because you got stuff from everywhere. If you look at the bigger page, Havana, so it's kind of more of a continental newspaper that this was clipped from, which I don't know about. So that brings me to trap ball, which is an interesting game. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's almost like home run derby. If you played that, or what's that other game, 500, where you hit the ball up to your buddies and whoever catches on the flag gets 500 points or whatever. So trap ball, and we actually messed around one day and played a game of it. So you have to, what they would do is dig a hole in the ground and then take their shoe off and put the ball in the hole of their shoe and then step on the toe of their shoe and the ball would pop up and you'd hit it usually between two objects like two trees. So, and if you get it between the two trees, it's a point, like home run derby. If you hit it over the fence, it's a point. Um, so it's kind of fun. I mean, I think there's a pop-up wiffle ball game like that these days where it's like, you step on the pedal and the ball pops up and you hit it. So, this is back in the 1800s, which is, like I said, I'd like to take old games and, match it to what it is today. Like the Indian games are basically, both guys would have a bat. So it was kind of close between, cricket and, almost like running bases, where each guy had a bat. If he hit it, he'd run back and forth, to get as many points as he possibly could. And here, this is kind of a neat thing. And try to blow it up. Um, but this is a graphic that shows the evolution of baseball games. Starting, there's one cat on there, rounders, town ball, and the modern baseball game. So it's kind of a chronology. It starts on the bottom and goes up. As you see, the family tree of baseball. It's a very interesting thing. I just kind of threw that in there for visual more than anything else. So here's as I was going through the scrapbook, I was making notes for myself a lot of times and trying to figure things out. And I wish I would have wrote down. I was an amateur researcher back in the day, so I was kind of green at it and wasn't good at documenting what I'd had and where I'd found it. But this I thought was interesting as I was going through my notes and kind of fit in with what I'm talking about today is rounders games I found mentions of rounders in various years and various locations. Up until I saw this, I thought like, Rounders was a antiquarian game that nobody played anymore, which is obviously false as you see some of the dates and locations. What's funny, it's like the locations are pretty much everywhere. You've got Alton, Illinois in 1868, Bangor, Maine in 1855, Atlanta, 1861. Fort Wayne, Indiana, 1859, Traverse City, Michigan, 1861, was at Hagerstown, Mass, 1861, New York, 1862, Petersburg, Virginia, 1862, and Raleigh, North Carolina, 1859. So Rounders back then was, kind of like vintage baseball today. Guys were playing everywhere. And I thought that was really interesting at some point. Actually, I just found that this week as I was getting ready for this thing. I'm going to go back and research each of those newspapers with the dates. And I've since found a mention of town ball in Ottawa, Illinois in 1850. Um, that I'm gonna I'd sent off to Larry McRae, but Bruce Allardyce, I think, has taken over the photo ball. So all their experts kind of go and dig, and you have to make sure you have backup on whatever research you've done. Um, but it's the beautiful thing about Chadwick Scrapbook is it's like you find these little nuggets of treasure. It's needle in a haystack, type of stuff. It's mostly predominantly reminiscences of his self and box scores, but every now and then you find little nuggets. So, and this was a hand-drawn diagram of town ball, what it looked like and how it was set up, which is, a little bit different on, how we play today or, even the vintage game. The scout position in the infield is basically, the rover shortstop. Um, and then outfield, you had uh, you had three kind of lined up, straight across, and two other scouts on the side of the base pass. And then you had a catcher and then a second scout behind the catcher. So in town ball, I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware is there is no foul territory. So just like that game that was described, right before the revolution, um, kind of describe that same game. So like, if you're standing, at the plate and you could turn around and hit it over the catcher's head if you were a good batsman or hit it far foul. That's basically where the laws or rules of the Knickerbockers came into play was foul territory. Those things. Doc Adams, who's on the Hall of Fame ballot, he helped institute a lot of that stuff to make it a fair game. So with Town Ball, another thing that caught interest of me was how they kept talking about the this article about the Philadelphia Olympic team that was documented playing in 1839. Actually, now since my early research and thanks to the internet and things getting digitized, they've actually found earlier mention of town ball being played in Philadelphia in the surrounding area, Newark, New Jersey, and also recently when I was going, kind of checking my notes on Proto, I noticed a couple entries showed up that I hadn't seen before that two accounts of town ball being played down in Edgar County, Illinois, which I believe is Decatur or just north of Springfield. Sorry. It's kind of eastern Illinois, more anything else. So town ball was more prevalent than we originally imagined when we first started doing a lot of this research about early baseball. And it's fun that way. Half the fun of it is trying to find something that no one's found before. And John Hussman and Frederick Iver Campbell used to tell me, if you're not looking for it, nobody is. So here's an example, which I thought was interesting, was the famous Excelsior Club from Brooklyn. Jim Creighton, I'm sure everyone's heard that name with old baseball, but the Excelsior team played the Olympic, the Philadelphians, the Philadelphian kind of all-star team. So played a town ball game, and as you can see, I can't bring it. Uh, Unfortunately, I cut off the box score. Stupid slideshow. Um, but maybe it's on the next page. But they played a all-star team of town ball players. So um, this helps us identify some of these teams too. So when you're looking at nuggets of information, yeah, it says the Philadelphia. So up to this point, we only knew that Philadelphia had an Olympic team. So you can see that athletics who still exists today, the Winona team, the Hamilton team, that equity team. So they obviously had a pretty well organized town ball collective in Philadelphia. So, this had to been early 1860s, uh, which is fun for me. So here is an, another game that was the Excelsiors, but it must have been their junior team because I don't see Creighton or Leggett on that roster. So this had to been a little later, probably after uh, the Civil War. But as you can see by the score, a lot of runs were scored that day. 80, 87 to 71. So I know once we played when I was playing for the Grinders, we played the Salmon up at the Methodist campground when it was in a grove of trees, and I think we had a game that was like 48 to 36 or something like that, and I couldn't walk for about 4 days after that from running around the bases. Uh, I think I batted like 16 times that day or something crazy. So you can only imagine the workout you get playing town ball with scoring 87 runs. But the bases were much shorter. So that's good news. So here's another thing I'd found and subsequently was going back and forth with Joanne Hulbert, who's a researcher out of Massachusetts. So um, I had found just basically the cover uh, with in half of a score sheet on Chadwick's scrapbook, and I got in contact with Joanne Hulbert, and she had the whole scorebook, or at least a copy of it that she sent me. So it was like 87 pages of handwritten scorebook from Massachusetts game. I didn't put all 187 pages on her, but just an example of what it looked like. And the scoring was a little bit different, how it went. This is a Ashkenet baseball club. The years of this, I believe, is the early 1860s, like 1860, 1861. But um, so as it goes on, uh, it was almost like a league scorebook because every set of pages had two different teams on there. So it wasn't the Ashkenet was a local team, and off the top of my head I can't remember any of the other ones, but there was about six teams that would play each other. So and I believe it's suburban Boston. So here's an example of Chadwick would correspond and kind of do reminiscences of how baseball began. So a lot of our early research on the topic of baseball, especially once Chadwick started writing. Not only was he a proponent of the game, but he was by far the best early chronicler, and he would write reminiscences. That's hard to say after a couple cups of coffee. Um, that how the game started, and that's why the theories have changed over the years. Of obviously Doubleday, Alexander Cartwright as the father of baseball, Doc Adams, Will Wheaton, were all early, they helped develop the game, as time went on. And the more we find out about Adams, he had much more to do with it than was originally mentioned. But they all in their own way. Even Cartwright, if he didn't invent a lot of the stuff, he was like the early Johnny Appleseed, spreading the game across the country and eventually out to Hawaii. And this is early box score of the Knickerbockers against the Gothams. And I want to say this game is probably 1854-ish. I was trying to go back and find the exact game, but what this has is you can see like with Adams, Wadsworth, um, I can't, DeYost, a lot of these guys went on to spread the game elsewhere and start other teams, even the Gotham team. So the Gotham team started off as, if you go back and look at the Knickerbocker history of like the really first games, we've come to know that, the early baseball teams are based on social clubs. So the teams that would play against each other were basically their best players within the club. And the clubs back then might have, the Knickerbockers had well over 100 members. So they had like their own, it was almost like intramural games where they play each other, and then their best players would play other clubs. So the Gothams eventually, when the Knickerbockers played the New Yorks, and lost like 21-1 or whatever the score was, people are like, well, if they invented the game, how they get their butts kicked by somebody? Because they've all been playing for, we know is John Thorne had found back into the 1820s that social clubs are playing each other. So, usually on Murray Hill before the Elysian Fields. So, this is interesting. It's a very simple form of scorekeeping. They really don't track hits. They track outs and runs scored. But usually tell by just looking at the score going across. And this actually comes from the Knickerbockers scorebook. So on Chadwick Scrapbook, a lot of them are too dark to read. And a lot of the ratings kind of chicken scratch, as you'll see in a second. But also the film itself is dark, so it's hard to make out. But these are all from the original Knickerbockers scorebooks. And this is it based on the original page it was on I had. So here's an example. So this is from the Knickerbocker scrapbook. It's hard to make out. I tried to lighten it, but it lightened everything. Um, but it's notes and can't. I think this was a practice game, if I'm not mistaken. No, Excelsiors and the Knickerbockers. So as you can see, this is a different game, but it was the same two teams. This, you could see a little bit better. Um, and this had been a little bit later because Adams is not on the team or some of the earlier guys. And I found another one was actually a practice game between Knickerbockers that predated the first New York game. That itself, I think I put a copy of that score in my fourth book, Peverelli's National Game. So Peverelli's National Game was done. Uh, uh, Charles Peverelli was a basically a sports reporter and wrote about baseball and cricket and horse racing and boxing and billiards, and a book called The American Pastimes. And the baseball portion of it, it was written in 1866, and that was basically a firsthand account of each team and their development. So he didn't write it; he compiled it. So it's a firsthand account of how the Knickerbockers were formed and who were their initial officers and the scores of all their games. And so we're able to draw kind of how they started and go back and try to find those games somewhere, be it in the New York Clipper or, just kind of local notes or Chadwick scrapbook or things like that, and kind of compile a puzzle and a picture of how, all this began. And so in the Peverelli book that I transcribed, I did the book with Mark Rucker, who is also a historian and Chadwick Award winner himself, but he's a pictorial historian. So I was able to supplement the transcription of the Peverelli book with examples of pictures, and like I said, the New York Knickerbocker practice game is in there. There's town ball in Massachusetts games, scores, that type of stuff. So I wrote it to help other researchers in the future, because Peverelli game copies of it were readily available anymore. So I put it together so other people, and it touched me before Marjorie Adams died. I'd go back and forth with her every now and then, and we'd talk on the phone, and she'd give me recipes, and I'd give her recipes, and but she said, she loved my book. She said, it was one of her most cherished treasures. in her collection, and I fully appreciated that coming from her because she was everything about early baseball. Um, and here's another example of Knickerbockers versus Excelsiors. Uh, this is against the Eagles. I thought I had one in here. It had Cartwright on the box score. I may have not been able to read it. Yeah, here's one with Adams. That's what I make out. Sorry about that. I thought it come out a little bit clearer. At least it did last night, but you get the idea. There's Doc Adams hitting lead off. Cartwright usually hit third, fourth, or fifth. How am I doing on time?
We got up, we started late. You got another 5 minutes for sure, and then
Okay.
let's do a couple questions and we'll be good.
Okay. Here's a picture of the Elysian Fields. Which almost looks like Grinder Field almost without the mill. So here's like I said, I'd keep notes and all that stuff. And this is when I start tracking that uh Knickerbockers 1842, 1843, which is pre first game of who was on the roster and who played. So uh, those with the X's were Knickerbockers that kind of perpetrated the game forward. I put some kind of notations up on top, as like a key. So Knickerbockers, the New York team, the Gothams are in there, the Washington team. So basically, the New York team became the Washington team, and eventually became the Gothams as a team. And that was basically the Knickerbockers like first arch nemesis. The Excelsiors kind of came a little bit later. Eagles came a little bit later, and then the Eagles split off, and eventually some of those guys moved to San Francisco and started the San Francisco Eagle team. So as you can see with Knickerbockers, you've got guys like Vale. So Vale started off as a Knickerbocker and then eventually became a Gotham and by 1852 and remained a Gotham through 1857. So in Vale, which was interesting, and I went back and looked at some stuff. So the Cartwrights have been in the United States, going back to, they came and worked for the Massachusetts Bay Company. And they were whalers as a family. And, and which was interesting in me was that Vale, his family came from the same time period, same whaling ship. So you can almost assume that those guys had known the families could have known each other for well over 100 years, and both ended up in New York playing baseball. So, and that's what got me thinking. It was just like, well, you know, did the Massachusetts Bay Company play, baseball back in the 1620s and all that type of stuff. So, that's why I like to kind of go back and, dig into, and reread a lot of this stuff. Um, and then, like I'd said before, he would write about reminiscences, the old Excelsiors he wrote about. And he used to, there was an old newspaper called Wilkes Spirit of the Times. And they would have like, editorial area about baseball. And it would be signed by X. And it was come to known, we've kind of put two and two together because X had a lot of these articles in the scrapbook. It was in fact Chadwick himself. Uh, writing about. And once we discovered that, we had to go back and reread a lot of that stuff because it's as you're looking for certain particular things, you kind of gloss over stuff, looking for other things, and a lot of these things are accidentally found. And you also find real interesting stuff of the day. Here's Excelsior Atlantic score, probably from the early 1860s. And as you can see, with the scores and articles next to it, it's all over the place. You have 1860, next to the 1905 box score from 1889. This is the Excelsior grounds, which looks like a cool little ballpark. Reminiscences of the ball field. I think this is the one. No, this is the one. Ladies playing baseball in the 1860s, a female ball club in at Petersburg, New York. So you find nice little treasures like this while you're, looking for something else. And that's it's a woodcut of the famous Brooklyn Atlantics picture. So there's lots of, I mean, there's hundreds of images in the scrapbook as well. So, and that's about it.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's interesting that once you find one nugget, it leads to more questions, right? Just kind of
Oh yeah,
generates more questions.
right, exactly. And and it's fun too. Like, when I was researching like early Chicago Tribunes, um, I'd found a passage, you find out what's going on in the area. And I think I have enough information to prove that the Chicago fire wasn't started by Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
Yeah,
It started in a tannery on about 14th and Canal and headed north
right.
because the daily newspapers was tracking it. And also I found another thing in the Chicago paper that talked about sea monster sightings on Lake Michigan in Evanston, Hyde Park, and Michigan City.
There you
So
go.
it probably was the same sea monster, like Loch Ness.
That's right. One question here. The one of your first slides, I think 1866, it was Round Town. Was that the name of the game?
Game.
Uh,
Yes.
yeah, Round Town, okay. And then the Cherokee game, you said what did the winner get rights to or
Uh, Hunting rights.
hunting rights? Oh, that's interesting. Because you
Yeah, they
always
had first choice of hunting rights.
oh, that's interesting. You always hear about the early lacrosse played by, the northeastern tribes, the nations, lacrosse, but not so much the ball that you just,
Right.
it's very interesting.
Well, it's lacrosse comes from a game called shinny, which is real similar to the Irish game hurling.
Okay, all right,
So
yeah,
it's kind of it's a bat and ball game, but it's like kind of more like hockey.
okay. Last question
And
was,
that's why
go ahead.
no, I was
Last,
going to say hockey and lacrosse came out of shinny as
okay,
a sport.
interesting. Town ball and the Knickerbockers baseball kind of overlapped for quite some time. You have a sense of when town ball became less of a thing and the real like baseball based, with its start with the Knickerbocker rules took up sort of dominated.
Yeah, I would say it probably goes back to 1857 when they started the National Association. So, back then, like if you look through Pavarelli's book, he has Massachusetts game, he has town ball teams, um, but they're kind of isolated. Obviously the Massachusetts game was isolated to Boston and in that area, and town ball was like Philadelphia.
Okay,
Baseball, the New York game, I think dominated due to probably more than anything else, the National Association being organized and then having it spread during the Civil War. Having that, everyone knew about, bat and ball games like town ball and stuff like that, but tightening up the rules, it's a lot, it'd be a lot like football in rugby, where football was basically rugby up until uh Walter Camp, codified the line of scrimmage.
okay,
And changed the game that way. They still play rugby,
right.
but you've got American football. That's how American football started. So, this to me is kind of like the same parallel to that, where it was just kind of a disorganized, 14 guys on one team, 15 on another, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
To having, nine players on a field and
okay,
90-foot bases and foul territory. And I
brilliant.
think that, those are the big differences.
Okay. Well, John, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time, to help fill the slots here at the conference and pretty interesting, you know, research that we've been doing over the years. These nuggets,
I hope it wasn't too boring.
not at all. No, it's great. No, it's really, really
But
appreciate
well, they say PowerPoint equals power nap, right?
it. That's by 1,000 PowerPoints. If I heard
Yeah.
that. All right, John, take care.
All right, you guys have good.
Okay.
Enjoy the rest of your
All right.
conference. Wish I could
Well,
be there.
bye.